America is not sliding toward a recession the way most people imagine it. There will not be a single headline, a single crash, or a single moment where everything suddenly breaks. What is happening now is quieter, more uneven, and far more dangerous because it hides behind calm national averages. While markets are told to relax, stress is already surfacing underneath, and it is not spreading evenly across the country. The real estate crisis unfolding right now is not national, it is geographic. Certain states are absorbing pressure that others have not yet felt. Foreclosure filings are climbing in specific regions, even while employment numbers still look stable. Home prices are stalling or slipping in places that were recently labeled resilient. These are not future warning signs. They are active signals that the system is already under strain. This is where the narrative breaks from the headlines. You can have rising GDP while households fall behind. You can have stable job reports, while insurance, taxes, and debt quietly erase disposable income. And by the time official reports confirm a recession, the damage inside the most vulnerable states is already locked in. Here is the part most people miss. Collapse does not arrive all at once. It clusters. It starts where balance sheets are weak, where populations are shifting, and where real estate was propped up by assumptions that no longer hold. Some states have already crossed thresholds that historically mark the point of no easy recovery. One state on this list has already seen foreclosure activity surge at a rate normally reserved for deep downturns. Another is facing rising distress while prices are still falling at the same time. These are patterns that appear late in cycles, not early. That timing matters. If you are watching this now, you are not guessing. You are reading signals. This knowledge does not create fear. It creates control. It gives you the ability to prepare instead of react, to understand why some markets will bend while others break. Stay with me, because the states ahead are not projections. They are case studies already. To understand why some states collapse while others only wobble, you need a framework. Without it, the data feels noisy and contradictory. With it, the pattern becomes almost mechanical. There are three triggers that govern state-level housing breakdown, and when all three activate together, reversal becomes extremely difficult. The first trigger is rising foreclosures during periods that are supposed to feel stable. This is the most overlooked warning sign. Foreclosures are not meant to rise when employment is holding, wages are still flowing, and headlines are calm. When they do, it tells you households are already failing under existing conditions. That means insurance costs, taxes, debt payments, and living expenses have outrun income. Once a recession officially begins, these fragile households do not recover. They tip, and foreclosure activity accelerates rapidly. The second trigger is falling prices at the same time distress is increasing. This combination is especially destructive. When prices slide, equity evaporates. When equity disappears, homeowners lose the incentive and sometimes the ability to stay. Walkaways increase. Distressed listings rise. Those listings push prices lower still. It becomes a feedback loop where each step reinforces the next. Markets can survive falling prices or rising foreclosures. They rarely survive both at once. The third trigger is state-level fiscal weakness. This is the backstop most people assume will appear. They expect relief programs, tax flexibility, or intervention to slow the damage. But some states simply do not have the capacity. Budget deficits, unfunded pensions, and rising debt loads limit response options. When housing stress rises inside a fiscally constrained state, there is no cushion. The system absorbs the shock directly. What makes these triggers dangerous is how they compound. Rising foreclosures weaken prices. Falling prices expand distress. Fiscal weakness removes the safety net. Once aligned, the system enters a self-reinforcing decline. Time stops working in your favor. Waiting no longer improves outcomes. This is why collapses feel sudden. Not because they appear overnight, but because recognition lags reality. By the time officials acknowledge the problem, listings are stacked, buyers have vanished, and exits are crowded. Understanding this framework changes how you see risk. You stop watching headlines and start watching alignment. You know which markets are vulnerable before consensus forms. That is not pessimism. It is diagnostic clarity. And in cycles like this, clarity is protection. Once you learn this lens, you cannot unsee it. Every report, every listing surge, every budget headline fits into place. You recognize early stress while others debate narratives. That advantage is quiet but powerful. It gives you time, options, and composure when markets lose theirs and decisions become rushed. That perspective often separates those who react from those who move deliberately ahead early confidently. Number 13 is Oregon, a state that still feels calm to most outsiders, but is quietly flashing one of the earliest warning signals economists watch for. Unemployment has been rising even while national conditions are still described as stable, a pattern that rarely ends well. Oregon's economy leans heavily on high-income earners and a volatile tax structure, which works beautifully in booms and punishes budgets in slowdowns. As tech hiring cools and remote work reshapes Portland's core, commercial real estate remains strained, and job growth softens. Housing doesn't collapse here loudly. It weakens through longer listings, cautious buyers, and a slow erosion of confidence. People don't panic. They pause. And when pausing becomes normal, demand quietly thins. Number 12 is Arizona, a state many still associate with growth, sunshine, and affordability. That reputation is exactly what makes the risk easy to miss. Arizona crossed the affordability line faster than almost any other state, with home prices outpacing wages in just a few years. Migration slowed, budgets tightened, and the state entered this cycle with very little fiscal cushion left. When prices begin to slip, even modestly, it matters more here because household flexibility is already gone. Water constraints, rising insurance costs, and a thinner safety net add pressure beneath the surface. Arizona doesn't look broken. It looks stretched. And stretched systems snap faster than anyone expects once conditions turn. Number 11 is Connecticut, where the stress isn't explosive but structural. This is a state carrying one of the heaviest per capita debt and pension burdens in the country while its population quietly shrinks. Younger families continue to leave in search of affordability and opportunity, leaving behind an aging demographic that contributes less to long-term growth. As retirees sell homes and fewer buyers replace them, housing demand weakens gradually. Prices don't crash. They stagnate, then slip. Meanwhile, rising liabilities consume budget flexibility, limiting the state's ability to respond when markets soften. Connecticut feels orderly, professional, and stable. That perception masks a slow drain that compounds year after year. Number 10 is New Jersey, often assumed to be insulated by wealth and proximity to major markets. Yet beneath that surface lies one of the most uncomfortable combinations in the country. Extremely high property taxes, massive unfunded pension obligations, and elevated foreclosure rates existing at the same time. When foreclosures rise in a state where prices are still holding, it signals households are failing for reasons deeper than valuation. Income pressure, tax burden, and cost of living are overwhelming balance sheets. Outmigration continues as residents quietly seek relief elsewhere. New Jersey doesn't advertise distress. It exports it, one moving truck at a time. What connects these four states is not headlines or panic, but internal erosion. Each looks functional on the surface. Jobs still exist. Neighborhoods still look intact. But underneath, the systems that support housing are thinning. Unemployment edges up. Population growth reverses. Budgets tighten. Confidence fades slowly before it breaks quickly. This is the stage most people ignore because nothing feels urgent yet. That's why these states matter. They show you what early collapse actually looks like. Not sirens, not crashes, but hesitation. Listings that linger a little longer, buyers who wait a little more, families who decide not to stay. Once these signals appear together, momentum is already shifting. And the states ahead on this list show what happens when that quiet stress finally turns visible. This phase of the cycle is the most deceptive, because nothing appears broken enough to force action. That illusion keeps people anchored in place while the underlying math continues to deteriorate. Employers quietly freeze hiring. Municipal budgets start delaying maintenance. Property owners defer repairs. Each small decision signals stress without declaring it. For homeowners, this period feels confusing rather than frightening. Prices haven't collapsed, yet expenses keep rising. For renters, choices narrow even before rents fall. The market feels heavier, slower, less forgiving. And for investors, optimism becomes defensive, clinging to assumptions that no longer match conditions. This is where narratives persist longest, and data is dismissed as temporary. But cycles don't reverse because people believe harder. They reverse when pressure exceeds tolerance. These four states sit precisely at that threshold, where stability is performative and vulnerability is structural. Recognizing this stage early is not about panic. It's about timing, awareness, and refusing to confuse quiet with safe while uncertainty deepens beneath daily routines for most observers. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the next states are where the damage accelerates. Number 9 is New York, the state that taught generations to believe demand was permanent. For decades, New York felt immune to cycles. Recessions came and went, but people always came back. That belief shaped everything from pricing to debt to confidence. Now the fracture is visible. Office towers sit partially empty, not for weeks but for years. Commercial vacancies bleed into surrounding neighborhoods as foot traffic fades, businesses close, and tax revenue thins. When offices stop paying, housing feels it next. Landlords lose tenants, banks grow cautious, and the ecosystem that supported premium rents begins to unravel. New York still looks powerful, but power without momentum is fragile, and the shift from inevitability to uncertainty is already underway. Number 8 is Texas, a state that built its reputation on scale, growth, and endless migration. For years, Texas was the counter-argument to every housing fear. People were arriving faster than homes could be built, so developers built aggressively. That confidence is now being tested. Inventory has surged across major metros, not because demand vanished overnight, but because it slowed while construction did not. Migration cooled, costs rose. Carrying empty units became expensive fast. In markets like Austin and Dallas, listings sit longer, concessions reappear, and price expectations quietly reset. Texas is not collapsing emotionally. It is correcting mathematically, and math moves faster than belief. Number 7 is Nevada, where stress doesn't whisper, it echoes. Nevada's economy leans heavily on tourism, entertainment, and discretionary spending, the first things households cut when confidence drops. When travel slows, income falls quickly and unevenly. Short-term rentals flood the long-term market. Hospitality workers feel pressure immediately. Housing reflects it through rising vacancies and softer prices. Las Vegas still glows at night, but the daylight numbers tell a different story. Units sit empty. Owners compete. The leverage that once favored landlords flips rapidly when visitors disappear. Nevada's vulnerability isn't hidden. It's structural, and downturns expose it brutally. Number 6 is Delaware, a small state carrying large risk. Delaware has seen a sharp rise in business bankruptcies, a signal that stress is moving through the economy faster than headlines admit. When businesses fail, employment weakens. When employment weakens, housing follows. Foreclosures remain elevated, and unemployment ticks upward in a state without the scale to absorb shocks easily. Delaware cannot dilute pain across vast regions or industries. Every disruption concentrates. Add pressure from neighboring states facing their own struggles, and the system tightens further. What feels manageable in larger economies becomes dangerous here. What unites these states is the moment where narratives fail. New York's permanence, Texas's migration engine, Nevada's tourism machine, Delaware's quiet stability. Each story worked until conditions changed. When they did, stress moved from abstract warnings to visible damage. Commercial real estate cracks turned into housing pressure. Overbuilding turned into competition. Tourism dependence turned into income volatility. Bankruptcies turned into foreclosures. The pattern repeats with unnerving consistency. This is the stage where denial fades. Owners feel it first. Cash flow tightens. Refinancing becomes harder. Waiting becomes risky. For renters and observers, clarity increases. Incentives appear. Negotiation returns. Silence replaces urgency. The shift is no longer theoretical. It shows up in listings, vacancies, and balance sheets. Across these markets, the same emotional transition is happening. Confidence turns into caution. Owners stop projecting strength and start asking questions. Buyers hesitate not because they fear prices, but because they sense imbalance. Lenders quietly tighten standards. Appraisers grow conservative. None of this makes headlines, yet it changes outcomes. This is how visible stress forms. Not through collapse, but through restraint. People delay moves. Capital waits. Projects pause. When enough participants hesitate at once, momentum breaks. That break is what you are witnessing here. It's not dramatic, but it is decisive. Once restraint replaces urgency, prices must adjust to restart activity. That adjustment is never voluntary. It is forced by time, costs, and debt. Recognizing this phase early gives you an advantage others surrender by waiting for permission to act. Those who understand cycles move before consensus, preserving options, leverage, and psychological calm under pressure today. These states matter because they mark the transition from early erosion to visible fracture. The recession is no longer something you anticipate. It's something you can measure. And once you see it clearly here, the remaining states on this list make more sense. The cycle doesn't accelerate randomly. It follows pressure, leverage, and belief until something breaks. Subscribe and hit the bell, because this is where the recession starts showing its teeth. Number 5 is California, the state where scale once disguised fragility. California doesn't suffer from a single problem. It carries a stack of them, all reinforcing each other. Housing stress sits on top of a massive budget deficit, deep pension obligations, insurance volatility, and persistent population loss. When people leave, the tax base shrinks. When the tax base shrinks, services strain. When services strain, quality of life erodes and more people leave. That loop is already active. Listings rise as demand softens. Prices slip unevenly. At the same time, the state's ability to intervene weakens because every dollar is already spoken for. California isn't choosing between good and bad options. It's choosing between bad and worse, and housing absorbs that pressure first. Number 4 is South Carolina, a state many still assume is insulated because it feels quieter. That assumption is exactly the risk. South Carolina's economy leans heavily on tourism and manufacturing, industries that react instantly when confidence drops. When orders slow or visitors stay home, income disappears fast. Foreclosure activity spreads across multiple counties at once, not isolated pockets, signaling systemic strain. The state lacks the fiscal depth to counteract shocks with large-scale support. Housing weakness compounds because demand thins while costs remain fixed. Insurance, taxes, and debt don't pause for downturns. They accelerate stress. What makes South Carolina dangerous isn't drama. It's how many stressors align at once without a visible safety net. Number 3 is Illinois, the clearest example of mathematical constraint. Illinois isn't facing a housing cycle, it's facing arithmetic. Enormous pension obligations consume future budgets before they exist. Debt ratios sit at levels that leave almost no flexibility. When residents leave, and they are leaving, the remaining taxpayers shoulder more weight. That accelerates outmigration, shrinking demand for housing while increasing pressure on those who stay. Foreclosures remain elevated, even when prices appear stable, a warning sign that households are stretched beyond sustainability. When recession pressure arrives, Illinois has limited tools to respond. There is no surplus waiting. There is no painless reform. Housing becomes collateral damage in a fiscal system that cannot rebalance without loss. What ties California, South Carolina, and Illinois together is not geography or politics. It's constraint. Each state operates with limited exit options. California's scale hides imbalance until it doesn't. South Carolina's quiet economy magnifies shocks when they hit. Illinois' obligations predate any downturn, ensuring stress regardless of growth. In all three, housing reflects deeper systems under strain. When budgets are tight, infrastructure slips. When services weaken, desirability falls. When desirability falls, demand drops. That sequence isn't theoretical, it's already visible. For homeowners, this is where loss aversion sharpens. Equity feels less secure. Taxes feel heavier. Insurance feels unpredictable. For renters and observers, clarity emerges. These markets don't rebound quickly because the issues aren't cyclical. They are structural. Waiting for normalization misses the point. Normal no longer exists in the same form. If you've sensed something was off in these states long before headlines caught up, that wasn't fear. It was pattern recognition. Systems with too many obligations and too few levers eventually choose outcomes. For you, housing is simply where those choices surface first. This is the phase where urgency replaces debate, because time stops being an ally. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the top two states are already past warning territory, and what happens there reframes everything you thought you knew about resilience in American housing markets. Number 2 is Colorado, and this is where disbelief gives way to clarity. Colorado was treated as balanced, educated, insulated from extremes. Yet foreclosure activity didn't merely rise, it surged at a pace normally seen only deep inside recessions. That matters because these increases arrived before the downturn was officially acknowledged. Inventory climbed past pre-pandemic levels while demand softened quietly. When foreclosures accelerate during supposed stability, it signals structural stress, not a cycle. What makes Colorado dangerous is speed. The state moved from budget surplus to serious shortfall almost overnight. Tech hiring slowed, office demand weakened, and migration lost momentum. Each pressure reinforced the next. Housing softness reduced confidence. Reduced confidence tightened spending. Tighter spending fed job uncertainty. This is how cascade failure forms, not through headlines, but through feedback loops that close exits before most people notice. Then comes Florida, and here the collapse stops being abstract. Florida now holds the highest foreclosure rate in the country while prices slip and inventory swells simultaneously. Insurance costs didn't edge higher, they exploded. Premiums climbed to levels that rival mortgage payments, turning ownership into a liability regardless of interest rate. When protection becomes unaffordable, selling becomes compulsory. Florida's housing market depended on relentless in-migration. That engine stalled. Population inflows dropped sharply as affordability vanished and monthly carrying costs soared. Investors, who assumed permanent demand, now face vacancies they cannot subsidize. Budget pressure limits intervention. Climate risk pricing is no longer theoretical. It's embedded into every bill. One failure amplifies the next until the system bends beyond recovery. This is the emotional peak of the story because Florida was never supposed to be vulnerable. Sunshine, scale, and momentum were believed to be protection. They weren't. When insurance collapses, migration reverses, and foreclosures rise together, there is no stabilizing force left. Prestige does not override math. Demand does not wait for optimism. If you're still watching, your perspective has shifted. These are not warnings. They are live failures already in motion. Colorado shows how fast stability can vanish. Florida shows what happens when multiple systems break at once. Collapse doesn't mean abandonment. It means repricing, forced exits, and permanent leverage transfer. It rewards patience, preparation, and the willingness to act before consensus forms. Those advantages compound quietly, just like risk once did. You don't need predictions now. You need positioning, timing, and awareness of where pressure is already breaking systems that looked safe only months ago, while headlines remain calm and reassuring to most observers today everywhere. Subscribe and hit the bell. This shift is reshaping the housing map right now, and understanding it early is the difference between reacting in panic and moving with clarity while others wait for permission from headlines. What ties every one of these 13 states together isn't geography, politics, or culture. It's a repeatable pattern that shows up whenever a housing system starts to fail. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, and more importantly, you can apply it anywhere. This isn't about fear. It's about diagnosis. Start with foreclosures versus employment. When foreclosures rise while job markets are still described as stable, something underneath is already broken. Healthy systems don't crack under normal conditions. They fail when stress is low because the foundation was weak long before pressure arrived. Next, compare inventory growth to population trends. New supply only works when people are arriving fast enough to absorb it. When listings surge while migration slows or reverses, prices don't need a crash to fall. Gravity does the work quietly, month by month. Then look at home prices against local wages. If rents or prices grew far faster than incomes, the market didn't become stronger, it became fragile. Affordability walls don't announce themselves. They appear when people stop upgrading, stop moving, and start waiting. Now zoom out to state fiscal health. Budget deficits, shrinking tax bases, and rising debt limit intervention. When housing weakens in states that can't spend their way out of trouble, declines last longer and cut deeper. Finally, factor in pensions and insurance. Unfunded obligations and exploding insurance premiums are silent accelerants. They don't just pressure governments, they force households and investors into decisions they didn't plan for. This checklist isn't predictive, it's observational. These signals are visible before headlines change tone. If multiple boxes light up at once, the break isn't coming, it's already underway. The real shift here is psychological. You stop reacting to narratives and start reading systems. That's leverage. That's timing. Drop the state you think cracks next in the comments. Debate sharpens awareness, and awareness compounds advantage. Subscribe and hit the bell. I'll keep tracking where the next break happens, long before it becomes obvious. This is how uncertainty turns into strategy, and strategy turns into calm action, even when markets feel loud, emotional, and misleading today now.